Well, question of whether or not Pitt could build on its win at Duke. Could they turn it into a little bit of a winning streak? The answer is yes. Panthers beat Georgia Tech on the road, 74-62 tonight, behind a big performance from Bub Carrington. 19 points in this game, a game-high 19 points on 6 of 10 shooting, 2 of 5 from 3 and 5 of 6 from the free throw line. He also had 6 rebounds and 3 assists. The best game by Bub Carrington in... Should have had the stats already lined up for you. But we'll talk about this. I mean, like, everybody's still sort of filtering in here on the live stream. We'll see how many people are willing to hang out on a Tuesday night to talk a little Pitt basketball after the game. Hopefully you guys tune in for a little Panther-Lair post-game show. We'll get through the preliminaries, and then we can talk about this game. Of course, this is youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, where you can get all of your Pitt video content, daily morning Pitt videos, weekly live streams we do every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Me and Jim Hammett get together to hang out with you for a little bit of Pitt conversation. These post-game shows that we do after every road game. That's sort of what we're settling into here. When Pitt plays a road game, we'll go live afterward to talk about it right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And the best way to never miss any of our content, whether it's the morning Pitt videos or the live streams, whatever it may be, is to like this video. I mean, that's just sort of the short-term goal, is to like this video. And then the long-term is to subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You do that, you can turn on notifications. You'll get an alert sent to your phone whenever we go live, and you'll never miss anything. So go do it. And then, of course, check out the website, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com, the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, recruiting. You find it all at Panther-Lair.com, and message boards to hang out with other Pitt fans all day, every day. Pitt fans are talking about Pitt sports on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. If you're a Pitt fan, you want to talk about Pitt sports, certainly you want to talk about this game or recruiting. We're going to have some recruiting content, football recruiting content for you tomorrow. Lots of stuff. I mean, we have a lot of content at Panther-Lair.com, and you can get it all and then talk about it on the Panther-Lair.com message board. So if you're a Pitt fan, you want to hang out with other Pitt fans, it's the best online community of Pitt fans right there, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. We'll start off. Scott Eisenberg's got a comment here. He says, that was a pretty quiet 19 points. Do you feel like that was a quiet 19 points for Bub Carrington? I feel like, let me see, his first basket was, he made a 3. About 7.5 minutes into the game. He made his first basket, and then he made a free throw a couple minutes later. And then, what else is he doing? He made a big jump shot with 4 minutes to go. He made some free throws with 3 minutes to go, and he made another 3 with 1:15 to go. And Bub Carrington finished the first half. Let's see what he had, with 11 points. So he scored 8 in the second half, but I feel like all 8 of his points in the second half were gigantic. Gigantic. Georgia Tech goes up 40-35. Bub Carrington makes a big jump shot to cut it to 40-37. He had that basket. Where's the rest of his points here? He made the huge jump shot. The game when Georgia Tech had cut it to 59-54 with 3 minutes to go or so. Giant jump shot. Then he made both ends of a 1-and-1, which was huge, to turn a 6-point game into an 8-point game. And then I'm missing a basket here in the second half. Where is it? Oh, he scored the first basket of the second half. Pitt was down, or not the first basket of the second half, excuse me. Pitt was down 34-31, and he drove to the hoop for a basket to make it 34-33. I don't think Bub Carrington's night was a quiet one. He didn't make a lot of threes. He was, 2 of 5 from 3, but he knocked down 5 out of his 6 free throws. The 1-and-1 that he hit with 1.5 minutes to go in the game was huge. The jumper that he hit a couple minutes before that was huge. I just feel like Bub Carrington looked like he was in control. Like he could get whatever he wanted. He looked more confident than he has looked in quite some time. He looked like he understood his role, and he was able to execute it really well. And I would say that was Bub Carrington's best game, points-wise, since he scored 20 against North Carolina. He had 20 against Carolina and 17 against Syracuse, but the 20 against Carolina, it took 17 shots. He was 6 of 17 in that game and made 4 of 9 from 3. I think this was just a really solid performance. I guess if we're going to talk, Scott, if we're going to talk about the 19 points being a quiet 19, I guess maybe it's because you would just describe it as just very solid and workmanlike. He drove, he hit jump shots, he knocked down a couple threes, and he made his free throws. 19 points, 5 of his 19 points come at the free throw line, which is huge. I mean, that is absolutely huge to go 5 of 6 from the line. He had 6 rebounds. He had 3 assists. He had 2 turnovers, but turnovers were a bit of an issue, more in the first half than the second half. And I think they had 8 turnovers in the first half, only 3 in the second half, so they cleaned that up a little bit. But unfortunately, Georgia Tech started making shots in the second half. Georgia Tech shot 48% in the final 20 minutes after shooting quite a bit less in the first half. But Pitt shot 52% in the second half. And with Bub Carrington, I think leading the charge. I think he had a really just outstanding day, an outstanding second half. The start of the second half was Ishmael Leggett, who had 14. Leggett scored all 14 of his points in the second half. He went 4 of 9 from the floor. He made a three-pointer. He was 5 of 6 from the free throw line. Leggett was awesome in the second half. He was doing all the things that we've talked so many times about Ishmael Leggett doing, about driving, about being tough and physical, willing to take contact, just sort of, reckless abandon. You know what I mean? Throwing all caution to the wind and just driving into the lane. And there were times where he was driving in and you were like, I don't know, man. There's like 60% of Georgia Tech's lineup is standing right where you're trying to get to. But he managed, he didn't score on all of them. He had a shot that was blocked. Where was that spot? Oh, like a minute 20 left. It was 69-63. He had a shot that got blocked, and at the other end, Guillermo got called for his 5th foul. Georgia Tech only made 1 of the 2 free throws, and it ended up not mattering. But Ishmael Leggett was tough. He was physical. He was aggressive. He went to the hoop, and he scored because of it, and he helped lead Pitt to a victory. And here we're coming to the first sort of big point that I have, the big takeaway I have from this game, and something I'm probably going to say a lot of times tonight and tomorrow on the Morning Pit, that this game gave at least an idea of how Pitt can win when Blake Hinson's not scoring and when Blake Hinson's not producing. And tonight, Blake Hinson did not produce. I mean, in the game, he scored 9 points, 3 of 8 from the floor, 1 of 4 from 3. And his 1 from 3 was a logo shot. It was awesome. It was a great shot to see because it's always fun when Hinson makes those, but it was the only shot he made from deep. He had 6 rebounds, 1 assist, and 2 turnovers. Got called for 4 fouls. But in the second half, he played 14 minutes. He set out a decent chunk of time. He played the first 5:16. No, he played the first 6:27, and then he came out and he returned for the final 7:37. So he missed, 6 minutes in the middle of the half. He only attempted 1 shot in the second half, Blake Hinson. 0 for 1. It was a 3. 2 rebounds, 3 fouls, 1 turnover, 1 block in the second half. That was Blake Hinson's second half stat line. And if you had told me before any game, certainly a conference game and certainly one on the road, that if the Pitt will be in a game where in the second half Blake Hinson goes 0 for 1 from the floor, doesn't attempt a free throw, gets 2 rebounds, no assists, 3 fouls, 1 turnover, 1 block while playing 14 minutes, I would have told you Pitt lost that game. But Pitt didn't lose this game. And what Pitt showed in not losing this game was I don't want to say a blueprint because I don't know we need to see this happen a few times. But something of an idea of how they can win when Hinson's not performing. And the way it can happen, and the way it did happen, is the elevation and evolution of the backcourt. Now, I don't want to take anything away from the 10 points that Guillermo Diaz-Graham scored. He was huge when Georgia Tech went up by 6. I mean, literally, Georgia Tech went up by 6 on that crazy dunk, right? That really cool, up and under dunk. It put them up by 6. I wrote that down as the 12:52 mark. 12 seconds later, Guillermo drained a 3. Huge. Less than a minute later, Jalen Lowe goes down and converts an and 1. And then on the next possession, coming out of a media timeout, Pitt's next possession, Guillermo drains another 3, and all of a sudden, Pitt went from being down 6 to up 3. And so I don't want to take anything away from what he contributed. They need as much offense as they can get out of Guillermo. But what really happened in the second half Ishmael Leggett scored 14. Jalen Lowe scored 9. Bub Carrington scored 8. That's 31 points. As a team, Pitt scored 41. So it was those three guys and Guillermo scoring 10 points. That was the second half offensive production. And it really was about those guards who combined to shoot 10 of 20 from the floor. Carrington went 3 of 6. Lowe went 3 of 5. Leggett went 4 of 9. They were 10 of 20 from the floor. They were 2 of 7 from 3. But perhaps most importantly, in the second half, those guys were 9 of 11 from the free throw line. Not most importantly. Most importantly, they were 10 of 20 from the floor. They were scoring, and they were handing out assists. Those guys combined for 6 assists in the second half. And so we've talked a lot, as we've talked about Jalen Lowe getting better and better and Jalen Lowe improving. And we've talked about how, well, they need Blake Hinson to always score, but if they get Jalen Lowe to keep playing like this, and if Bub Carrington can grow back into his role and Ishmael Leggett can attack, boy, they might have something. They might have a way to be able to score on teams. And what we saw tonight was Blake Hinson didn't produce, particularly in the second half. Let's just talk about the second half here. Blake Hinson didn't produce because he had 9 in the first half. That's good. But he didn't produce in the second half, and instead the backcourt carried the load. 31 points out of Carrington, Lowe, and Leggett. Huge. Huge, obviously just to get this win, and every win at this point is huge, but huge for this team going forward to get that kind of production out of the backcourt, and ideally, add that kind of confidence to those guys in the backcourt, confidence to the rest of the team that the backcourt can carry the team if they need to, and maybe some of it takes some pressure off of Blake Hinson. I think he was feeling a lot of pressure, before that Duke game, certainly, and I think he blew off a lot of steam in that win. But now he's got a real concrete example of going on the road in a conference game, and the guards carried it. The guards won the game with their performance in the second half. And I think, that's just such a huge benefit to everybody on this team, not the least of which, and I'll come back to him again, not the least of which Bub Carrington. Whatever he, I don't know what he would say, and I don't presume to speak for the man or know, on a, psychological level what he's thinking or going through, but it certainly seemed like he was losing confidence or lacking confidence over the last, what did I say? He scored 20 against Carolina. He scored 16 at Louisville on 6 of 10 shooting. So it's been the last 3 games he hasn't done all that well. 19 points over the last 3 games combined. 7 of 35 from the floor in the last 3 games combined. But it feels like he's been in a bit of a slump for a little while now. Maybe since ACC play started, it's been tough sledding for him. I think he broke out of it a little bit tonight. I think he showed a little bit, showed us, showed his coaches and his teammates, and perhaps most importantly, showed himself what he can do at this level. I have to think he gained confidence coming out of this game, which is huge for this team as they go forward. All right, I want to get into some comments and questions, hear what you guys have to think about this game. William Richter says, great game. I think Fetty is starting to look decent. Diaz-Graham was making shots. Bub had a great game. Austin is still underwhelming, and Lowe continues to impress. This was a complete game. It was a complete game, but it wasn't. And I think I'm slightly encouraged by how it was an incomplete game in that you didn't get anything out of Blake Hinson in the second half. Zach Austin scored early, right? He scored 2 baskets before the first media timeout and didn't score again. So he finished with 4 points, 3 rebounds, and 4 assists. So nice assist numbers. He actually led Pitt in assists and tied for the game high. But really didn't do much. And I thought even defensively, I thought he had some lapses. Federico had 7 rebounds. Scored 2 points, only had 1 turnover, which I'm a little surprised by that number. But Federico really didn't do. He played 6 minutes in the second half. This was all Guillermo, and really his final minute was when he had to come in for the final 49 seconds after Guillermo fouled out. And so Fetty, had his moments in the first half, and grabbed 6 rebounds in the first half. He had an offensive rebound in the second half. But I think Jeff Capel will constantly be sort of wrestling with this question of, do I want the defensive guy or do I want the offensive guy? And the question gets easier to answer if Guillermo is not scoring. Like, he hasn't been scoring recently, so it was easier to go with the defensive center and play Federico. But if Guillermo's scoring, I think it gets far more difficult to judge. And it's something that I don't know if you can really have a plan going into the game. You can have something of a plan, who you start and that kind of thing. But you're ultimately, if Guillermo starts scoring, then he's going to stay in. And he should stay in. And he was a big boost to the team tonight. Like I said, I didn't want to diminish what he did. He had 10 points, 3 of 4 shooting from the floor, 2 of 2 from 3, scored 2 free throws. He only had 1 rebound. It was an offensive rebound. He didn't have any assists. He didn't have any turnovers. He didn't have any blocks. He had a steal. But he was a plus 11, which in the second half, and a plus 15 in the game, which was the highest plus minus of anybody on the team, playing 17 minutes. So I don't want to take anything away from the game he had. And I think if he can score like that, obviously that's a huge boost going forward. But if you can get the guards going like they were going tonight, now you become a really dangerous team, because it only takes Guillermo getting hot or Blake Hinson getting hot, and you've got a team that I think is really difficult to defend because it feels like everybody on the court can score. Now, that's not necessarily the equation when Fetty is out there or when Will Jeffers is out there. You don't really have that same kind of threat. You're only facing really 4 offensive threats as opposed to 5. But if you've got the 3 guards going, and you've got Blake Hinson out there, and you've got Guillermo Diaz-Graham out there, and he's going, now you have 5 legitimate offensive threats. And really, even if you're only going to play with 2 guards and Zach Austin, you've got 5 threats. I mean, Austin is a threat, although he gets more of those sort of chaos points, fast break, second chance opportunities, scrambles, that kind of thing. The Zach Austin chaos points. But you get my point. They have a lot of threats on this team, and that's what got them the win tonight, I think. William Richter also says, need to be able to win these last 2 games in January to get on the NCAA tournament bubble. Honestly, getting into the NIT is a win. I think to keep our core, we need to at least make the postseason and not collapse. So, I mean, obviously, every win is going to be a big win. They finish out the month by going to Miami on Saturday and then hosting Wake Forest next Wednesday. So that's going to conflict with the live stream. We'll decide if we want to do a live stream on Tuesday or move it to Thursday. We'll make that call, next week. But they do. I mean, if you could go down to Miami and win, now you're really going to start building something. And there was a point last season, like early mid-January, they lost 2 in a row and rattled off won 8 of the next 9 or something like that. A streak that I think started with a win at Georgia Tech, coincidentally. Last year's team is very different from this year's team, but I think there's a similar opportunity here. I mean, when you look down, I don't think the ACC has a lot of separation. I mean, right now it sort of feels like there's North Carolina, and then there are a lot of teams sort of bunched up, and Duke almost feels sort of bunched up in that as well. So when you go to Miami, you host Wake Forest. You host Notre Dame in the first game in February. You go to NC State. You go to Virginia. That's going to be really tough. But then you host Louisville. You go to Wake Forest. You host Virginia Tech. There's a lot of winnable games in here if Bub Carrington keeps playing well, if Jalen Lowe keeps playing well. And I don't think these are one-off occasions here. I mean, I think Jalen Lowe has shown that it's not a one-off occasion. He's now 7 games in a row where he's playing really, really well. What did I say his final stat line was? 4 of 9 from the field. Over the last 6 before this game, he was shooting 40%. So you go 4 of 9 from the field. I think you're going to bump that a percentage point or 2. He was averaging 12 points per game. He scored 12 tonight. This is not a small sample size for Jalen Lowe anymore. This is 7 games in a row of really strong play for him. Bub Carrington is a really talented player. And if you broke out of a slump or a mini slump with this game tonight, I don't necessarily think it's a one-off because we know he's a really talented player. Ishmael Leggett was doing the things we believed Ishmael Leggett was capable of all season, that he has done at different times this season. You just hope he stays healthy. If he keeps playing this way, it sort of feels like he might not, but you hope he does. So I feel like what we saw out of the guards tonight is a natural progression more than sort of a freak out of nowhere type of thing, which I think they can, maybe can sustain, maybe can build on. There are winnable games. They just have to remember how, they have to remember the things they did to beat Duke and remember the things they did to beat Georgia Tech. And carry those things with them when they go to Miami. Carry those things with them when they host Notre Dame. So on and so forth. They have to bring that along. I do, and I'll say this, I'm going to get back to the comments and questions. I'm going to let you guys steer this conversation for the most part. One thing to watch out for, Carrington, Lowe, Leggett played the final 13 and a half minutes of this game. Didn't come off the court. Guillermo as well, except Guillermo came off with 49 seconds left to go because he fouled out. If he didn't foul out, he was going to play the final 13:33 as well. Hinson came back in at the 7:37 mark. Carrington, Lowe, Leggett, and Hinson played the final 7:37 together. And again, Guillermo would have been part of that group as well. What I'm saying is, I understand why Jeff Capel is stuck with that lineup for 13 and a half minutes and kept the three guards on the court together for 13 and a half minutes, but you can't do it for 40 minutes. You know, like you can get a lot of minutes for these guys, and Ishmael Leggett got, most of his minutes in the second half. He played 19 minutes in the second half. He subbed in, forget when he subbed in, or he might have even started the half. I forget when he subbed in, but at a certain point, as you move into the real grind of the season, which is where we are right now, I mean, this is the grind. You're going to have to sub guys, and that's the guard depth, which we've talked about a lot. It hurts right now because you'd like to be able to have a little bit more of a rotation, particularly if you want to go with three guards more, which was obviously a working lineup and a winning lineup because it's the lineup that got them the victory tonight. But it's going to be, it's tough. It's when people start talking about, oh, they should start the three-guard lineup. Well, yeah, fine, but you can't play these guys 40 minutes. At some point you're going to have to start rotating, and they're going to have to find that balance between using the three guards together, which I think is a very effective lineup, and mixing and matching with Zach Austin to get those guards rest here and there. Carrington and Lowe are young guys, but you're going to run their legs off if you play them like this every night. So that's something to keep an eye on, going forward. Let's see. Homer Simpson says, how many games do you think we need to win to get to the NCAA tournament? I hear 8. And how many? I hear 8. And how many for the NIT tournament? And if we get invited, do we accept? If they get invited to the NIT, they're in. I don't think there's any question about that. How many wins do they need to get to the NCAA tournament? Well, they're 12-7 right now. They're 3-5 in the ACC. So they've got 12 games left to play in the regular season. I mean, the target always has to be 20, but I mean that means going 8-4 over the final 12. Can you go 8-4 against Miami on the road, Wake at home, Notre Dame at home, NC State and Virginia on the road, Louisville at home, Wake on the road, Virginia Tech at home, Clemson on the road, Boston College on the road, Florida State at home, and NC State at home? Can you go 8-4 against that? And that just gets you to 20 wins. You're going to need good wins in there. You're going to need to win at Virginia. You're going to need to win at Miami, at Virginia Tech or NC State. Or they don't go to Virginia Tech, excuse me. They play Virginia Tech at home. Maybe Boston College. I don't know where they are. We'll have to check the net rankings tomorrow. But, 8-4 against that schedule, that gets you 20 wins. I don't know if that guarantees you in the NCAA tournament, depending on which wins you get. If you go to Clemson and win, that would obviously help. If you only go 8-4 or less, if you go 7-5 or something like that, you're going to need help probably by winning a bunch of games in the ACC tournament. It's a challenge. They dug themselves a hole. And it's going to be tough to dig out of it. But they've got to look at it one game at a time. They have to build on, just like they built on what they did at Duke and found some new ways to win tonight. They're going to have to be open to those options and opportunities when they go to Miami on Saturday. Let's see. Glovebox 23 says the guys looked fully in control while Blake was on the bench, and when he came back in, he really wasn't part of the offense. It was great to see the younger guys take control. It absolutely was, and I think those younger guys will still defer to Blake Hinson at times, but they're getting more and more confident in what they can do and how they can score. I mean, Jalen Lowe driving to the hoop, driving to his left, and this will be something to watch on Saturday to see how Miami tries to prevent Jalen Lowe from driving to his left. Just like when that game against Florida, that first game in Brooklyn, when it was like, oh, look how they're stopping Bub Carrington from going to his right. How's he going to adjust to that? Somebody's going to stop Jalen Lowe from going to his left. How's he going to adjust to that? Bub Carrington's figuring it out. How is Jalen Lowe going to figure it out? What's going to be the adjustment to the adjustment? What's going to be the counter adjustment from Jalen Lowe and Jeff Capel as teams adjust to, I mean, he is so quick and so explosive going to his left and so good at finishing those plays. Teams are going to have to adjust to it. They're going to have to find a way to stop it. They haven't yet, but again, this is 7 games in a row where he's been doing this, where he's been playing really well. Somebody's going to find a way to defend against it, and when they do, it's going to be interesting to see what the response is. Scott Eisenberg, who said there was a quiet 19 points for Jalen Lowe, says, if you had asked me to guess how many points sorry, I was just I saw Milan Brown, the Pitt assistant coach, just sent a really nice tweet. Says, this is my 28th season of coaching college basketball, and I think this is one of the best true road trips I've ever been a part of. A+ from everyone with our focus, togetherness, toughness, and preparation, and it started at the top with Coach Capel. 2 big-time road dubs. I imagine he's talking about Duke and Georgia Tech, but maybe just Georgia Tech. But nice message from Milan there on Twitter. But Scott says, Scott, who had said that it was a quiet 19 points from Bub Carrington, says, if you asked me to guess how many points Bub finished with, I would have said less than 19. I almost felt the opposite because I felt like he just kept making big plays. Whether he was driving or was pulling up for a jump shot, the three, 2 threes that he made, the free throws, I just feel like he was really active, really present, really productive, and really effective tonight. And looked better, even if some of those games that he had where he scored 20 against Carolina, I feel like anecdotally, just the eye test, I feel like he looked better tonight than he has in a long time. Probably going back to the non-conference, that might have been the best he has looked in a conference game. I know he shot like 6 of 12 in the game at Syracuse, but I just watching him play, and maybe it's because he's been struggling a little bit for the past few weeks. But I just feel like that was the best we've seen out of Bub Carrington in a while, and it was fun to watch. It looked good. Homer Simpson says it was a great game to watch. Only complaint is I think they kept Federico in the game too long. He doesn't produce enough offense. Yeah, so that was the one thing I was saying a little bit ago. I know you posted that comment before I said this, but I'll kind of reiterate it. I think for Jeff Capel, it's a balancing act. It's a constant balancing act of, do you want the defensive center or the offensive center? Because you really don't get much defense from the offensive guy, and you don't get much offense from the defensive guy. It becomes an easier decision if Guillermo is not scoring. If Guillermo is not scoring, if you can't make baskets, then it's easy. You stick with Federico. But if Guillermo is scoring, I think they stick with the offensive lineup more often than not. And Dongo was going off for Georgia Tech. He was going off when Federico was still in there. I mean, he had 2, 4, 6, 8 points against Federico in the first 4 minutes, almost 5 minutes of the second half. He had 8 points in the first 5 minutes of the second half, and he was playing against Federico that whole time. And so Capel brought in Guillermo. I like, if it was me, I would almost look at it like, okay, fine. If you're not going to defend this guy, if we're not going to get much defense out of you, and we're going to give up 8 points to their center in the first 5 minutes of the second half, screw it. I'll at least give me the guy, give me the guy who can at least score and give us a chance, to answer those buckets. And that was ultimately what Guillermo did, and I think that's what Jeff Capel went with. I think it'll just be a balancing act. It'll be what the game calls for, and who's playing well. I think if Guillermo's making shots more often than not, he'll stay in the game and he'll play more. But again, I think it depends. It will depend on what, on the course of the game, the tenor of the game, and how the game is going. Peninsula P says, I'll take a win on the road no matter how ugly. Now let's go get a W in Coral Gables to complete the road trifecta. Was this ugly? Was this an ugly win? Pitt shot 48% from the floor in this game, 42.1% from three. They were, 76% from the free throw line, but they won the rebounding battle. They committed 11 turnovers, but only 3 in the second half. They had 13 assists on 24 baskets. They committed 14 fouls, which is a lot less than they committed in the Duke game, or a lot less than they were called for in the Duke game. Was this an ugly game? I didn't think this was an ugly game. I actually thought they looked good. They looked like they were in control. And even when Georgia Tech got out to that 6-point lead with 13 minutes to go, there was that little voice of like, uh-oh, they're in trouble. They're not going to be able to come back from this. They let this game get away. But for the most part, I was like, I'm pretty sure they're going to come back on this. Bubba's playing really well. Jalen's playing really well. Whoa, Guillermo just knocked down a 3. I'm pretty confident that they're going to, overcome this 6-point lead. And they did it pretty quick, actually. They overcame that 6-point lead in less than 2 minutes. So I didn't have to dwell on those doubts very long. But I was pretty confident they were going to be able to come back and take care of it. They seem to be in control from the start, and really kind of held Georgia Tech off. And I so I didn't think it was an ugly win. I thought it was a pretty solid win. Peninsula P says Jalen Lowe is that dude. Yeah, he's pretty great. He's a really good player. There's no question about it. Scott Eisenberg says this team still really needs to figure out how to get Blake Hinson shots when the other teams are switching. And yeah, I think there's something to be said for that. I think it'll be an ongoing struggle. Not struggle, I shouldn't say. But I think it's going to be a challenge all season long to work on finding new ways to get him open looks. And he doesn't need a lot, right? I mean, we know he's open, pretty much from the time he steps off the bus. He views himself as being open. So it doesn't take a lot to get Blake Hinson open, but they are going to have to find ways to get him the ball and get him the ball with some space, create some space for him. I do think, Scott, to your point, I think if Jalen Lowe keeps playing well, Bob Carrington keeps playing, builds on what he did tonight, if Ishmael Leggett keeps playing well, those opportunities are going to come from Hinson, because the game plan of we're going to stick to Hinson and get him and do everything we can and not let him beat us. We're not going to let Blake Hinson be the guy who beats us. That plan becomes less and less appealing for an opponent when Bub Carrington is that guy who's beating you, and Jalen Lowe is that guy who's beating you, and Ishmael Leggett's that guy who's beating you. If those 3 guards come out and play in the first half against Miami the way they played in the second half tonight, Miami's not going to be able to focus all their attention on Blake Hinson. And when you stop focusing all your attention on Blake Hinson makes baskets. And so that should be the residual effect and the impact of these guards going off like they did here. This is Mike. Mike S comes through with the 3 stars. We did this after the Duke game. Remember, we talked about 3 stars, and it was definitely Blake Hinson and Jalen Lowe, and who was the 3rd star. We had a little discussion about that. Let's do this for all the post-game shows. We'll do our 3 stars. So I think Mike went with the obvious, and I can't say I'm going to disagree. It says number 1, 2, and 3 stars. Number 1 was Bub Carrington. Number 2 is Ishmael Leggett. Number 3 was Guillermo Diaz-Graham. Leggett did his best impersonation of Jamarius Burton tonight. I mean, Carrington's definitely number 1. I mean, I was just really impressed with how he played. This is actually like a good question. I thought it was just going to be easy and obvious, Mike, when you brought it up, but there's a good question about this because you have 4 legitimate candidates, because I can't discount Jalen Lowe. Jalen Lowe scored 9 points in the second half. He was 3 of 5 from the floor. He made a huge 3 to turn it was a 61-55 game. and made it into a 9-point game with less than 3 minutes left to play. So that was a huge bucket. He made 2 out of 3 free throws in the second half. He had 2 assists in the second half and 2 rebounds. No turnovers. He was pretty great in helping this team win down the stretch. His and one. So, they had that big dunk. Georgia Tech had that big dunk to go up 6. 12 seconds later, Guillermo makes a 3 to cut into that lead. And then on Pitt's next possession, Jalen Lowe goes down and converts an and one. Back-to-back 3-point plays. Huge for Pitt because that tied the game, and put it back to where Pitt could take control, which they ultimately did. I don't think... Yeah, Georgia Tech didn't lead again after that and one. So it's hard for me to leave Jalen Lowe out of the equation. It's hard for me to leave Ishmael Leggett out of the equation. It's hard for me to leave Guillermo Diaz-Graham out of the equation. I probably have to drop Guillermo, even though his 2 threes were huge. They ultimately, they cut Georgia Tech's lead from 6 to 3, and then he turned a tie game into a 3-point lead for Pitt. I hate to drop him out. Maybe I can make a tie for the third star. But I think I got to go. I think I have to go Carrington as the number 1 star, Leggett as the number 2, and Lowe as the number 3, with Guillermo not far behind. Not far behind at all. I like the 3 stars tonight. If you have, we'll keep the live stream going for a little bit here. If you have some 3 stars, drop them here. Who are your 3 stars for this game? Ron Peterson says this was the first game Pitt won with Hinson not shooting hot. Lowe covered that scoring loss with all 3 guards on the court, Hinson shooting hot, and Diaz playing. They can beat any team in college. Yeah, it's late on a Tuesday night. It's getting late on a Tuesday night. It's a school night. That's why we don't have the bourbon, in case you were wondering why we haven't done a shot. It's a school night, man. I can't do it on a Tuesday. I'd probably fall asleep, to be honest with you. Ron, I can't. Most teams in the country, probably 150 teams in the country, if they have all of their guys playing really well at the same time, they can beat anybody in the country. The thing is, the thing that really separates teams is that they tend to have their best players playing well most of the time. Like they have the guys who are consistently playing well, and those guys who, when they play well, their good is so much above, everybody else, and they do it consistently, and that's what separates the really good teams. Most teams in the country, if all of their best players play well at the same time, they're probably going to be able to compete with and or beat just about anybody they face. Pitt is no exception, because if Carrington is rolling and Lowe is rolling and Leggett is rolling and Hinson is a threat from outside and making shots from outside and Guillermo is knocking down a couple threes, no. They're going to be tough to beat. There's a lot of teams that won't be able to beat them, and they'll be able to beat most teams in the country. I agree with you. I don't know if that necessarily makes them unique, but what it does say about them is that they've got talented offensive weapons. And they only scored 72 tonight. They didn't score 90 or anything like that, but they looked like a really good, really efficient offensive team that was only held back by their turnovers. They had the 11 turnovers. They had 8 in the first half. They finished the first half with 31 points. They could have had 40 or more if they didn't turn the ball over so much. Unfortunately, Georgia Tech didn't turn those turnovers into a giant, point advantage. But Pitt could have scored in the 40s or maybe even approached 50 if they didn't commit as many turnovers as they did in the first half. It was really the one flaw in this game, and it was really limited to the first 20 minutes because they only had 3 turnovers after halftime. Scott Eisenberg asks, how many videos of Leggett getting clobbered without a foul being called do you think Capel is going to send to the ACC this week? Yeah, I think he's got plenty of evidence. And but you know what? He probably already filled up the Dropbox with all the video from the Duke game. So I don't know if he can get too many more in there. Paul Sebastian asks, do these last 2 wins give you confidence for the rest of the season, or could they regress back to their first couple bad losses? I think, Paul, anytime a team wins in any sport, really, you're looking for what's repeatable and sustainable, right? Like, what can they do consistently? If they win a game, and sort of the inverse of this applies if they lose a game. But if they win a game, you look at the things they did to help them win the game and say, can they do that again? Can they keep doing that? Can they sustain that? Or did somebody just play way out of their heads? Was Mark McCarroll shooting 12 of 12 against Georgetown or wherever that was? Might have the details wrong on that. But, and no disrespect to Mark McCarroll, great former Pitt player. But you have to look at the game. You look at the things that worked, look at the things that got the victory, and say, okay, can that be repeated? Can that be sustained? Can they do that consistently going forward? And I think what's encouraging to me about tonight's game, Jalen Lowe, again, and we've been tracking it like every game after, 5 games, after 6 games, and now it's been 7 games in a row that he has been playing at a high level. You look over the last 6 games. I had these stats earlier. He shot 40% from the floor over the last six games prior to today. 40% from the floor. Tonight, he shoots 4 of 9, right? Right on track with that number. He was 43.8% from 3 over the last 6 games prior to tonight. Tonight, 2 of 5 from 3. So he shoots 40%, right in that same range. Over the last 6 games prior to tonight, he was averaging 12.3 points per game. Tonight, he scored 12. He was averaging 3.3 assists per game. Tonight, he had 3 assists. I think he was averaging 3.3 rebounds, and tonight he had 3 rebounds. What I'm saying is, you're looking at Jalen Lowe over the course of 7 games now, producing at a consistent level. He's been really good, and he's been doing it consistently. Pretty much, he has hit a level, and he is sticking there, and it's not plateauing, because I think he can still spike at different times, but he is stuck at, I almost was going to say he has stuck at this level, but it's not a negative. It's a good thing. It's a climb that he has made throughout the season. And he's gotten to a point now where he can almost be counted on for this kind of production, right? So, yes, I think Jalen Lowe's performance tonight is sustainable because he has been sustaining it. I think Ishmael Leggett's performance tonight is sustainable because what he did tonight is the things that he has done at different points throughout the season when he has been at his best. Same for Bub Carrington. What he did tonight, I think we saw Bub Carrington's game laid bare tonight. I think this was the kind of game Bub Carrington can give you when he is playing well, which I think he can do consistently because he's a talented player. He's a good player. And that's the thing with Carrington and Lowe. They're good basketball players. So when you see them playing at their best, I don't think I necessarily look at it as an outlier. The Bub Carrington, Bub's game tonight feels like an outlier compared to where he's been over the last few weeks. But I think given what we know of his talent level, we've seen earlier this season, what we know about him coming into Pitt, and what we sort of expect out of him, this is where he can be on a pretty regular basis. And so I think for those 3 guys, it is very much sustainable and should be encouraging going forward. What you have to do is get a consistent performance out of Blake Hinson. You can't just get 9 points in the first half and 1 field goal attempt in the second half. You need him in double figures every game. If you can make up the difference with Guillermo Diaz-Graham, that's great. But you need him in double figures every game. And then, have those games where he really pops. Like the Duke game when he scores 24. I didn't expect him to go 7 of 7 from 3 again. But something a little bit better than 3 of 8 from the floor and 1 of 4 from 3. That's not a huge stat line. That's not the kind of stat line Blake Hinson needs to produce. So, I guess there could be a question of, do you still have confidence in Blake Hinson? I mostly do because we've seen him play at a high level for a while. But, I think he'll get back there. But these guards, I think, can sustain what they did tonight, will sustain what they did tonight. Or I shouldn't say will. I can't predict the future. But I think they can sustain what they did tonight. And if they do, then, yeah, I think it bodes well for the rest of the season. Dan K's a super chatter. Thank you, Dan. We appreciate you. Did you have a comment in here that I skipped over? If you got something you want to say, Dan, definitely throw your comment up there and we'll get to it. Tim McConkey asks, does Guillermo return to the starting lineup or do you like him off the bench still? You know what I always say, Tim, and I mean, if you've listened to these podcasts before or watched these videos or read things I've written or anything like that, I always say, like, I kind of don't care who's on the court for the tip-off. I don't. Show me the minutes at the end of the game. Show me who was on the court when the game mattered. Show me who was getting the minutes when the game was hanging in the balance and Pitt needed to do something to win the game. Show me that. And so when I look at the game box score here, Guillermo played 17 minutes and Fetty played 22 minutes. But in the second half, Fetty played 16 and Guillermo played 13. So when Jeff Capel needed to win the game, he went with Guillermo. It didn't matter that Guillermo wasn't on the court for tip-off. Capel went with Guillermo. And I think it'll just continue to be a feel thing. And I think sometimes he will be in the starting lineup and sometimes he won't. I think they'll bounce back and forth. I wouldn't be surprised by that at all. If it was me, I would probably still start Federico and bring Guillermo off the bench. I kind of like him coming off the bench. But what's funny is like they were talking about like bench points tonight. And you know, if you look at the box score, Pitt had 26 bench points. But like the bench points came from Leggett having 14 and Guillermo scoring 12. I'm sorry, did I keep saying he had 10 in the second half. If I keep saying he scored 10, he had 10 in the second half. He had 12 in the game. But it's funny is like Leggett and Guillermo, I don't even really think of them, and this isn't some weird coach speak thing, I don't really think of them as bench guys, you know? Leggett's been in the starting lineup a ton. Guillermo's been in the starting lineup a ton. I don't think of them as bench players. You know, I think of them as starters, basically. They're 6 and 7 starters. So it's you know, so it's kind of funny, but I would probably stick with the starting lineup they had tonight of Carrington, Lowe, Austin, Hinson, Federico. I really like Austin coming off the bench. I think he can provide a spark coming off the bench. But I just don't know if you want to start 3 guards because you put yourself now you're taking you have to take one of the guards off. At the first or second media timeout just because you can't run all 3 of those guys the entire game. So I kind of like Austin starting because it gives you more flexibility in the guard lineups you put out there and how you rotate those guys and move them around. And I like Leggett coming in off the bench too. I think that's a good option. Although if you had the guard depth to do it, I would prefer to start Leggett and bring Austin off the bench. That's what I would do, but I don't think you can do it with the guard depth that they've got. Dan K, Super Chatter, we appreciate you. He says, is Pitt flat out a better team on the road? I know you have commented before that they may be more focused playing on the road. I think they I don't know what it is. We'd have to ask those guys. I do think, and I don't know if this applies to Pitt basketball or not, but I think when you go on the road, you're out of your comfort zone, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes being out of your comfort zone can lead you to paying attention to details. You know what I mean? You're out of your comfort zone, and so you sort of become more aware of everything around you, become more aware of your surroundings, more aware of what you're doing, maybe a little more focused. Whereas when you're at home, you could get just slightly lackadaisical. And I don't want to say that in the sense of being lazy, but you could slip a little bit. You know what I mean? You can slip a little bit, maybe not be quite as sharp because you're comfortable in where you are. Whereas if you're in a different locker room, you're in a different court, you're in a different hotel, you're in a different city, you're in all these different, I think you can be a little more focused because you're out of your comfort zone. Maybe this team benefits from that. I don't know. It didn't help them against Florida when they went to Brooklyn, right? So I don't know. It'd be interesting to ask those guys, and I'm sure they've talked about it at different points. Maybe we'll ask them about it once they get back from the end of this road trip. But they've had some success. They didn't help them at Syracuse. It didn't help them in Brooklyn against Florida, but Duke and Georgia Tech, they've done well. All right, I think we'll wrap it up there. It's just about 10 o'clock. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in tonight. I really appreciate it on a Tuesday night. I guess it shows that these live streams, these post-game live streams can work. So even on a Tuesday night, but probably helps that they won. Either way, thanks for everybody for tuning in. I appreciate it. Make sure you like and subscribe so we can get a little credit for it from YouTube. And we will be back. We'll have another Morning Pit tomorrow morning. We'll have the live stream tomorrow night, Wednesday night. And then we'll have a live post-game show after the Miami game on Saturday. So thanks for tuning in. I hope you have a great rest of your Tuesday night. And we'll talk to you tomorrow for the Morning Pit right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.